Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Thursday night, April 27th in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Well, this evening I want to start things off a little differently. I would like to get right away into the longer-term forecast because as we get a crop established here in this spring time period here across the states, we always want to just know once we get in the ground, kind of what is the atmosphere going to be delivering as we go forward. So while I've been talking about this, you've been looking at a map of ocean temperatures, but these are the ocean temperatures back on January 1st. And the point I'm trying to make here is that throughout most of this winter, we were dealing with a moderately strong La Niña, right? We watched in February and then definitely through March just an epic collapse of this La Niña. And the question is, where are we going from here? Because this is what the ocean temperatures look like now. So we've already seen major changes. Again, January 1st, April 26th. We've seen a lot of warm water surfacing in this area, and much more is expected to continue to surface in this area. And some of the big concerns we have right now are what's going on with these ocean temperatures here. Now, we've talked about this quite a bit lately, but let's just kind of get into it very quickly here. The colder water that's off the west coast with the warmer water between Alaska and Hawaii, at least the Aleutian Islands and Hawaii, this is a part of something called the negative phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And here's what you need to think about with this. If we keep the negative phase of the PDO here, this tends to lend toward a less extreme heat of a summer for the West, even maybe additional or extra precipitation. And it also tends to mean the plains and Midwest are a little bit hotter and drier. Now, that is in the absence of anything else. That's what the negative PDO does. Normally, when there's a negative PDO, there's also a negative INSO, which means there's a big area here of colder water, and those two things go together. So that would be La Niña and the negative PDO. But we don't have that this year. We have a rapidly developing El Niño event where the trade winds are coming back across the open Pacific Ocean at times and the warm water is upwelling, but we've hung on to this negative PDO signal. Now, what this means is these two things are going to be in competition right now over what the potential for the summer could look like across the United States. So we have to just ask, which one do we think will win? Now remember, I'm only focusing on two things. Don't forget the MJO is always a part of this circulation. It's generally more of a sub-seasonal or even on the short-term timescale fluctuation. We have very warm ocean temperatures in the North Atlantic, in the Caribbean, in the Gulf of Mexico. Those are also a part of an Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, a signal here in the Atlantic that influences North American weather. Plus, don't forget, we always have to watch the position of the Bermuda High and what's going on in the Bering Sea or here in the Chukchi Sea or the Arctic. I mean, all of these things will work together throughout the season. But pre-season, our biggest indicators are kind of what's upstream, which is in the Pacific Ocean. All right. Now, right now, the consensus, the common thought is that the PDO signal will fade while El Nino really regains a lot of strength. And much of that's going to be coming from our models, right? I showed you this throughout the month. This is just ocean temperatures from April into May, going into June, July, and August. And what do we see during that time period? El Nino surges, positive Indian Ocean dipole shows up. We keep the warm water here in the Atlantic, but this area of colder water, which is established now, seems to fade to neutral. And if that all occurs in that sequence, we end up getting more risk of hotter, drier conditions west going into summer and higher probability of seeing less stress in terms of drought and heat in the central part of the United States. The East Coast is difficult to correlate because the East Coast weather patterns are often dominated by the position and strength of the Bermuda High. And I don't yet have a clear enough signal to tell you where I think that Bermuda High is going to be. All right? So given that these are the two main factors we're looking at right now, I want to provide some ancillary information on this, basically in addition to the European model. And what was released yesterday was the newest update from the Bureau of Meteorology out of Australia, commonly referred to as BOM. And what was important about their forecast is that going from June into July and August, they're watching the ocean temperatures rapidly rise, maybe up to 2 degrees C above average by the time we get into July. And they've now got this as high in October at 2.8. Now, there's so many things that could hang in the balance here. This could really suppress Atlantic developing hurricanes or hurricanes developing in the Caribbean. Maybe not so much those that will develop here in the Gulf of Mexico, but certainly here and here. The second thing we have to think about with this is what does this mean in terms of the fade of the PDO? It possibly means that it'll fade quickly because the warmer ocean temperatures here will start to push into the Eastern Pacific as well. And I want to put this overall into context. If we just go by what the Bureau of Meteorology is suggesting, that by October we have 2.8 degrees C above average ocean temperatures, that would be record-breaking, all right? Last time we were that warm was in 2015 into 16, at the start of 2016, where the ocean temperatures were 2.7 degrees above average. Look at the 97 into early 98 El Nino event. It was about 2.1 above. And then the 82, 83, which was a very strong El Nino, still about 2.2, 2.3 C above. So what we're suggesting here is that we're coming out of the basement and possibly moving pretty high in this diagram inside of about 6 months. So knowing that right now is the most dominant signal that's in the forecast models, we're going to watch to see what that means overall, because we're seeing all the models respond to this. It does not mean the models can't be wrong. In fact, they're very good at being wrong, and this can most certainly be the case. But when we look at the evidence presented to us here on April 27th, that developing El Nino would suggest Bermuda high position may be here. Very weak southwestern monsoon, split flow across the western United States, and where that flow comes back together, it's somewhere here in the central U.S., which tends to make this area wet. Okay, where would the heat be? Well, it would stretch from Texas up through the Great Basin toward the Pacific Northwest, and that's exactly what the models are suggesting for June, July, August right now from the Climate Prediction Center. We can add to this the forecast from the National Multi-Model Ensemble. Again, wetter conditions are in these colors, drier here. I see a weaker monsoon. I see wetter conditions across a broad section of the country here. We can then add to this what the European model is saying. Again, it's got the weaker monsoon. It's got much above average precipitation in this area, and then an odd kind of spot here in the Carolinas that's showing up drier. I can't quite explain that one away, but it's there in the model. Overall, though, we'd see consensus. And then, of course, we had the newest data from the IRI Multi-Model Forecast Group, which is out of Columbia University. And again, you don't see these colors showing up across much of the United States. I think what's going on is they're all just right now responding to the fact that most of the weather forecast models suggest that these ocean temperatures continue to warm because the atmosphere is behaving in an El Nino-like fashion. Remember, the ocean temperatures are symptomatic of the atmosphere. What I'll be watching all week long is to see how much these ocean temperatures change with the heat wave that's coming into the west. That's going to be an important thing we'll talk about here in a few moments. But just thinking about all of this, the reason we're discussing this is because we're getting a crop established. And we're now just saying, well, all right, what is the atmosphere going to do? Because over the last 30 days, it's been very dry in the southwest. We've actually had a big section of the central United States, even extending in parts of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio drier. We've been drier in the mid-Atlantic. We've been dry in this corner of the Dakotas and Montana. And we look at this and say, all right, we need to still overcome some issues. For example, the newest drought monitor released today still shows extensive drought in parts of Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, eastern Colorado, and New Mexico. And we have questions as to whether or not this drought area will be relieved. Now, I'm saving the Pacific Northwest and California for later discussion because we're going to watch snowmelt here, which will be critical for reservoir conditions going forward. But right now, just thinking about all of this, this is where we seem to have the soil moisture deficits. So going down from the top 40 inches, we just look here and see the soil moisture percentile still a bit low in these areas we've been talking about. So thinking about this map and these areas that are still quite dry, we need to just ask what it would take to really bring the moisture up in these spots. So here's what I wanted to do. I went out there for June through August and looked at the central United States National Weather Service region. And I went through here and I ranked all of these and plucked off the wettest and I plucked off the driest. Now here's what happens in summer if there's the driest. Deep troughs sit right off the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia, and large ridges get blocked over kind of the U.S.-Canada border right here. And what this effectively does is it shuts down the moisture coming out of the tropics, out of the Gulf of Mexico, and we just bake under this. So this is this dreaded pattern of a large central United States ridge. So we don't want to see this, given that right now we already have drought in this area. Now what helps get this to that state is if we have cold water here, that's negative PDO, and cold water there, that would be La Niña, and also some colder water in this area as well. So you see, these are the factors. And what do we still have? We've still got this one, We don't have La Niña, and we certainly don't have colder water in this area. So when you kind of stack up all these really, really dry summers, this is what the ocean temperatures tended to look like. So we have a piece of it, but not all of the pieces of it. You know, the next thing is, where would the MJO have to spend a lot of time? And it tends to spend a lot of time moving really right here over and getting stuck somewhere in phases 7 and 8. So there's a lot of rising motion in this area and a lot of subsidence here across North and South America. So we have to watch out for that component of this as well. And this is what happens. If it is the month of July and you're in MJO phase 8, look, you get troughs of low pressure here and ridges of high pressure there. So if you're going to stick with me through this summer, you're going to hear me talk a lot about, will the MJO get stuck and stay in phase 8? Well, what I'm going to tell you, though, is that without La Niña, it becomes a bit more challenging to get the MJO to stay in phase 8. That's maybe a bit more of a rare place for it to be. In fact, the MJO typically likes to move quite a bit. But just as a reminder, this is what our ocean temperatures would have to look like for this to be a scorching hot summer in the central United States with no precipitation. Okay? So do you notice how what we're suggesting here is that we've lost some of those signals? And I'll come back to the MJO in just a few seconds as to where we think it's going to go off and start to move around to. So here's the newest forecast data that I've got for you. This just came out from the European model. This is the time period of May 7 to June 7. Now the run we're looking at here is from the 24th, a few days ago. You've actually already seen this one. What's interesting about this is that the newest run, the one that just came out for the same time period, it went a little drier in this area. But the reason why is because it was initialized dry. We've got wide open windows right now for a lot of field work to happen in this area, given that the temperature pattern's getting better, and the drier conditions in the next 10 days are just showing up all the way out there when you look for the next month. It's a feedback issue in the model. It's an issue that whatever you initialize it with, it just tends to carry that on. What I would do is I would tell you this was probably the better forecast for that time period. I think we're going to see quite a bit of thunderstorms in the plains. I think we're going to see a lot of storms that roll through the Midwest and the Mid-South and in the Southeast. I think we're going to go back to a very active go of it in this month of May into early June. Now, to support that, I want to show you the latest forecast from the CFSV2 model. So here's the drier weather this week and next week. But we can already see the redevelopment of some troughing off of the west. This is going to bring moisture in first here, and then look at what it's doing in this area. That's a very similar forecast to the European model. I'll show you that in a few seconds. And then you say, well, what about beyond that? Well, we see there's another shot at some drier weather that comes through, but then it opens back up again. So I would make a case that right now there is nothing hindering this pattern from moving a lot. And this is my main case for you today. The MJO is one of our most dominant sub-seasonal and short-term weather teleconnections. And when I look at it, there are the phases 1 through 8. What we're looking for is sinking air in these colors and rising air in these. So there's sinking air coming across Africa into the Indian Ocean over the next 15 days. There's rising air that's coming from the Indian Ocean out into the Pacific Ocean over the next 15 days. And some sinking motion now that is over this region, including part of North America, which is why the East Coast is wet and the central United States is dry, but then that's replaced going out here once we get out over the next 15 days. So my point is to tell you this. Every time I show you this figure in the coming weeks and months, if I draw slants like this, the pattern is open, it is moving, the MJO is not stuck. Remember when we go back to this last winter, what did I do? I said the blue-greens ran straight up and down on the map. That was when we were trapped in La Niña. So see some of these differences with me here, okay? So what do we have? Let's get into the near term. We're going to finish this up with an international outlook at the very end today. We do have some high wind advisories that are out for parts of the plains, flood watch out here, and still we're flooding along the Mississippi and its tributaries, plus the Red River of the North. The hydrologic outlooks and the flood watches that are here, plus the avalanche advisory that is out for parts of the Cascades, this is going to have to be watched very carefully. We also see down here in Florida, we still have severe thunderstorm watch this out for the rest of this evening here on Thursday. And what's going on is over the last 3 days, we watched a low come through Colorado, deliver the first meaningful rain getting into this section of the country, including finally raining in Oklahoma, southern Kansas, and parts of Texas. It produced some very large hail here. we're watching, we watched hail fall, eastern Texas, throughout the south, and then down into Florida as well. There's been a lot of hail. We covered that this morning. What's changing now is that current low is sitting here. So as you just take a look at some of the satellite imagery from today, big storms are still popping out here in parts of Georgia and Florida on the southern side, and this extends into the Gulf. But this is low number 1, while low number 2 is sliding on to the south right here. Now notice in the west things are clear. We can see the snow in the mountains, and there's been some very warm temperatures that have started to move into the west. But first, I just want to let you know we're going to keep an eye on this region tonight for severe weather. We're also watching Florida's coasts as well for some severe weather. And then tomorrow, the main hail threat right in this area in and around Dallas. That's the region I just pointed out to you a few moments ago is what we're going to watch from this next system. So let's get an idea on where it's going. Let's pick this up at 7 o'clock tonight and just kind of watch one low spin its way through the mid-Atlantic, bringing rain into the Carolinas and up the East Coast. A second low that's going to be diving down. And as we play this forward, this is going through the overnight hours on Thursday into Friday morning. Here's the heavy rain desperately needed coming over parts of Virginia, Maryland, parts of Pennsylvania, some of this in the eastern Cornbelt as well. And this low dives down, brings more rain into parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, where we desperately need it. It's not drought busting, but it's at least an improvement. And again, we're going to watch on Friday night right in through this corridor for strong to severe storms, really Friday afternoon into Friday evening. And then as we get into the weekend, we're going to watch two things. This low curls up right here throughout the day on Saturday, and a much deeper trough sits over parts of the Great Lakes. Now, while all of this is happening, the West is just seeing summer-like warmth. In fact, even today, just take a look. This is the afternoon temperatures here, about 4:50 in the afternoon Central Time. We were approaching triple digits down here in Southern California. A lot of temperatures here, though, in the 70s and 80s. And as we go forward with the temperatures, take a look. This is tomorrow's highs expected for the West Coast on Friday. Getting into Saturday, another hot one where we have cooler air surrounding that trough that's diving here over the Great Lakes and over the low that's cutting through Texas. Sunday, warmth, but notice the coast is beginning to cool off. And that's because as we get into the 1st of May and the 2nd of May and the 3rd of May, the deep trough that was here moves, the ridge that was over the west moves, and a trough redevelops off the southwestern coast of the United States, specifically off of California's coast. But you saw several days in there of very hot conditions, Friday, Saturday especially. And that's why over the next 7 days, we're accumulating a lot of heat units. This is a GDD calculation, base 50, max 86. This is going to be the area that's going to experience the most change, though, after we get past this next week. So thinking about that, remember, we still have a lot of snow on the ground. Right now in the Sierra Nevada, there is between 50 and well over 100 inches of liquid in the snow. We're going to watch a lot of this melt. That's why there's a lot of concern about the flooding issues, which we covered in this morning's report. But with the warmth that's coming to the midsection of the country, after the additional snows we might see in this area from this weekend, we're going to watch all of this just go away. It's really going to fade very, very quickly. And that's because this is what the pattern's up to. Okay? Watch me play through this. Jet stream level, trough ridge pattern. Here's the ridges. These are the troughs. As we play this forward, there's the low that dives into Texas over the next 48 hours. This is the one that initiates this severe weather on Friday near Dallas. But here's the ridge opening up, and that's what's bringing in the heat. Now, this pattern is still blocky. We've still got this omega block here, and it's kind of bunched everything up. That's all upstream. Upstream is this way, downstream is that way. But we're going to see as we go into early next week, this deep low move over the eastern Great Lakes, and as it exits on Tuesday into Wednesday of next week, a trough redevelops off the coast of California. The ridge opens up in the midsection of the country into the Canadian prairie, and it wants to stay there. This is through May 7th, getting out there to like May 8th, 9th, and 10th. And as we've been discussing, this pattern sets up this area for a lot of severe weather, brings in a lot of warmth and moisture out of the Gulf, and we're going to watch for very warm conditions to set up in the midsection of the United States. Now, before I tell you about that heat, let's just go through the models real quick. 12Z GFS on the left, European on the right. We've already seen system number 1 spread through the Carolinas, Mid-Atlantic, Eastern Corn Belt. Heavy rains possible here, while system number 2 dives through Colorado, bringing in a little chance of snow. We then have a weak frontal boundary connecting the two, the deeper low coming over the Great Lakes and the low that's over the Red River Valley of the South. so some light rain here. Then as we play forward, we have the low to the south over the weekend, the deeper trough setting up over the Great Lakes, and this is bringing the reinforcing shot at colder air in this area, plus the next round of heavy rain for the East Coast. But then after that thing moves out, all attention goes back to the west. And there's going to be a stretch of drier conditions in through the midsection of the country and warmer conditions in through here. As the trough ridge pattern resets, and by next Thursday, getting next Friday, we watch a low coming into the west. Now, I mentioned to you multiple times that I'm concerned in the month of May for this corridor to open up with a lot of severe weather. And what do we see here? This is all the way out to next Friday. We're seeing the models begin to respond with something going on here, bringing in some moisture, bringing in the risk of some stronger storms. It could be a play on this trough plus a ridge of high pressure that sits here, but we got to keep an eye on it. So some numbers to kind of wrap up this precip discussion. Over the next 10 days, here's the probability of getting 1 inch of total precipitation. Here is the probability of 2 inches. And take a look. This area, especially right in through here, needs this moisture to be coming in. From the wet side of this to the snowy side of it, snow in the Sierra Nevada, snow in the Rockies at the highest elevations. And remember, with that weekend system, Ontario, parts of Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, and the UP may pick up some additional snow. All right, what are the temperatures doing? We're going to have to watch this carefully, okay? Now, we know that each morning when we hit our lows, that on my maps, this color range here represents where we're below freezing. So this is 7 a.m. Friday morning, getting into 7 a.m. Saturday morning, 7 a.m. Sunday morning. Remember, at one point, we thought that this colder air was going to be able to make it all the way down through the central and eastern Cornbelt. Then getting into Monday morning, right there. And then Tuesday morning. These are cold mornings, but we're looking for that frost line. And then as I play the rest of this through, this is Wednesday, Thursday. Look at Thursday's temperatures. Remember, there might be some rain-cooled air in through here, but we're really rebounding. And it seems as though this frost threat is starting to really mitigate itself and get out of there as we press ourselves through that first full week of May, which means that the pattern break is actually showing up quite well now in the near term. So let's finish this up. Let's talk temperatures. This is the 5-day sliding window of average temperature anomalies out there today, 5 through 10. Watch the Canadian Prairie, the northern plains. The plains really just warm up here. The last holdout for cooler weather is going to be the southeast and east coast as the next trough develops here off the west coast. And that's where we seem to be taking maybe the front half of the month of May. Okay, other things happening around the world. We've been discussing all week this heat that's in parts of the Iberian Peninsula. We see it's cooler in Europe, but warm in Kazakhstan and getting into parts of Russia. It's also very hot in this part of Africa as well. Well, when you look back over the last 45 days, the Iberian Peninsula has been extremely dry, whereas much of Europe has been receiving above average precipitation, including Ukraine and part of the Russian wheat belt. I was talking to my good friend Arlen Suderman today, and we was just talking about where they're going to plant a lot of soft wheat here, spring wheat, and we're seeing drier conditions showing up in that region. Now, to have a look at this a little closer, I want to take a look at some NDVI data, and I'm going to take you to Spain, because right now we're sitting at the very low end of the distribution on their spring NDVI values. But you come over to Ukraine, and you're going to see they're almost at the top. So that's just a difference when you compare Western Europe to Eastern Europe. Another place that would be important to check out is what's going on in South America. Let's bring this down, just take a look at all of Brazil. Brazil's NDVI values are right now above average, especially when you get in here into like Mato Grosso do Sul, Goiás, this area, very high, versus where Argentina's values, which have popped up as of late, spent so much of this growing season, look at this line, well below average. In fact, the lowest, kind of on record here. As we think about where this is all going forward, I'd like to take you back to Europe first and just show you that the Iberian Peninsula is expected to stay drier, whereas much of Central Europe, including the UK, is wetter. And look at how wet we're expecting the remainder of this spring to be for parts of Ukraine and the Russian wheat belt. Finally, I just want to show you what the newest long-range model suggests for South America. Now, know that the monsoon normally winds down, so this is not a lot of precipitation in total, but the models are still kind of suggesting decent rains for the finish of the safrinha crop, whereas parts of southern Brazil, far southern Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina may still continue to struggle with drought. And this certainly is how things look over the next 10 days. This is just another view, but over the next 10 days of what the precipitation pattern looks like. So thank you again for the extra time. Hopefully the explanation at the beginning kind of provides some context, but we've got a lot of things just to keep monitoring here. And that's why we'll talk again in the morning for some of you that get the report. For everyone else, I'll talk to you next week. Thank you.